Matt Bracken, Saturday afternoon, and no time to waste. It's funny that we messaged each other this morning because I was going to reach out to you yesterday as Syria was starting to unravel to see if it'd be made sense to have a conversation. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, the situation in Syria is changing so fast, and I want to, it's accelerating. The speed of the advance. It's not just like we're the front column of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS. It's not like where the front column is. That seems to be spurring like a general uprising around the country. So in all of these cities, there are a lot of people that don't like Assad, but they just have to shut up and take it, while his army's in control. But with the approaching uh, HTS forces, they seem to be emboldened. So it's spreading much faster than just like a conventional military advance. It's spreading in the rear with people just having a general uprising, even in Damascus, today as we speak. So I want to just say, why should anybody give a shit about Syria? I can see a lot of American conservatives that are pretty politically aware, and they're just like, I don't care who wins in Syria. It's not us. It doesn't matter. And that's the main thing I want to emphasize is this is a new front in the Third World War, and it could go kinetic directly between Russia and the United States any hour or not. But I mean, it literally could go kinetic between Russia and the United States. And there's so much to this. I'm going to post a thread on my Twitter account with some maps and article links, just all in one thread, so you can kind of follow what I'm saying. But this has to be seen completely not as an internal Syrian conflict. This is a proxy World War III battle. Turkey is major involved. There's the HTS force supported completely by Turkey. American money goes to Turkey through all these NGOs and aid for international development and endowment for democracy, all these cutouts that find their way to these reformed moderate rebels, right, that are essentially sheep dipped and laundered ISIS and Al Qaeda. Absolutely, they are the same people. They've gotten some good public relations training, so they're not coming in like ISIS, burning people alive in cages. Okay, the leader of this group, Al Jalani, he was a right hand man of Al Baghdadi, the head of ISIS or Daesh, and he became his like Syrian wingman. And through the Syrian civil war, he was only in his 20s, but he was learning and learning. And he understands the situation in Syria to the extent that he knows he has to appeal, at the beginning at least, to all Syrians that are tired of the Assad regime. He can't come in saying we're going to hang all the Christians and Alawites, and we're or we're going to hang all of the Shia. There's all of these elements are at play in Syria. If you look you can look at political maps of Syria by their provinces, and then you can look at it by who controls what. Which groups. There's Kurds in the east. There's Shia in parts, and a lot of it's not just like a line like below this line is Shia, above this line is Sunni. A lot of it is like a very complex mosaic, and he understands that he has to portray himself as a liberator of Syria, a nationalist, not a jihad fanatic ISIS Al Qaeda guy. Once he takes complete control, I believe he is still the same ISIS guy. But he knows that he can't have general uprisings ahead of his approaching army if he's burning people alive, if he's hanging, blowing up churches. He had a CNN interview, which obviously was set up and coordinated with the United States. CNN is Mockingbird Media. That's Anderson Cooper. That's CIA. So this slick PR front has got American fingerprints all over it. He knows what to say, right, to appeal to most Syrians, as opposed to stiffening the resolve of the Syrian army to stand and fight against him. He's taking their surrenders. There have been a few videos of prisoners being massacred by, old school ISIS types. They're quickly taken down off of social media. I mean, there was one that I posted that showed a guy with the chin beard, shaved mustache. That's like a real follower of the Prophet uniform, the no beard or no mustache beard, machine gunning Syrian army prisoners. In an hour, it was gone from the internet. Um, Similar beheading scenes gone from the internet. He's being portrayed as just the liberator of Syria. So what, Matt? Who cares who's in charge of Syria? Well, Syria has been a Russian ally going all the way back to the Soviet Union in the 70s and even in the 60s. In the 60s and 70s, the Soviet Union also was an ally of Egypt. So Soviet Union / Russia had bases both in Syria and in Egypt. We flipped Egypt, through the Sadat era and onward. During the fall of the Soviet Union, we basically took over control of Egypt diplomatically, and the Russians are out. They no longer have bases in Syria. We do NATO exercises, with desert warfare exercises with Egypt. So the Syrian bases have become super important. If you look at a map of Syria, and you can go on my Twitter after this, the big port in Syria is there's a little coastal strip above Lebanon, between Lebanon and Turkey. That little coastal strip, it's only like 50 miles. It has a port called Latakia. That's the big commercial shipping port for Syria. And near there, south of there, is an Air Force base, which has been vastly expanded over the last, say, decade as a Russian force projection Air Force base. Closer to Lebanon is another port, the second port, called Tartus, Tartus. That has been a Russian, Soviet, and then Russian naval base since, if you can imagine, 1971. I mean, there were, in the 1973 war, there were actually missile-to-missile, gunboat-to-gunboat battles at sea, the first in history, where like destroyers and patrol boats fired at each other without ever being in visual range. First time in history. That was Israeli, ships versus Russian ships firing missiles at each other. Technically, they're Syrian, but they were Russian, gunboats firing Russian missiles. So this base in Tartus has vastly expanded also. So it's become like a refueling and refitting center for the Russian Navy. As everybody should understand, the Russian Navy is really limited in this the Western Hemisphere. If you've got to go all the way to Vladivostok, right, to get to the Pacific, but on the Atlantic side, way up at Murmansk, above the Arctic Circle, that's iced in a lot of the year. Then you've got the Baltic. They've got Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg on the Baltic, but to get to there, you've got to go through the Baltic Sea, which is a NATO lake completely surrounded by NATO countries. So getting to the Atlantic is very problematic for the Russian fleet coming in and out of the Baltic. That's where the Nord Stream pipeline was blown up by the United States. Otherwise, they've got to leave Crimea, which has been Russian since like the time of our American Revolution. To leave the Crimea, the port of Sevastopol, they've got to go right through Turkey, the Bosporus Straits and the Dardanelles, very tight. Now, there are maritime treaties that allow the passage of Russian naval ships, but you have to understand that's completely at the whim of Turkey. Turkey can just say, screw the maritime treaty, you're not getting through, and a Russian ship can't get through. I mean, it's tighter than the damn Suez Canal. I mean, nobody can go through there unless Turkey approves it. And you could say, well, Matt, but there's a treaty. Well, so what? I mean, who cares? You can freely sail down the Red Sea, but the Houthis will fire at you, right? So this naval base in Syria has been really critical for Russian power projection. For 50 years, they've had Navy ships there. They can refuel there. They can have warehouses. One ship brings in extra missiles, puts them in a warehouse. Destroyer comes in, gets new missiles. Super, super critical. There aren't, nuclear submarines don't care about fueling, but all the surface ships run on oil, and they don't have unlimited range. And you can't just zip back to the Black Sea to refuel, and you can't always find a tanker at sea. So if you have a port where fuel can be loaded onto tankers, the tankers can refuel Navy or Russian Navy ships, incredibly important. In the last couple of years, Russia has been kind of kicking our ass out of Central Africa. I'm not really changing them. This is just an extension of Russian presence in Syria. We've had army troops fighting Al Qaeda in I think it's called Al Qaeda in the Sahel, southern Sahara. It's like Mali, Niger. We've actually been outmaneuvered diplomatically and militarily. In Niger, we had a military base where Russians came in, and the government flipped towards Russia against us, and we were actually blockaded from bringing in our own transport planes. This was in Niger. Well, how's that possible? It's possible because Russia has been building a series of forward bases for their air power and their naval presence. But in terms of air power, this airfield near Latakia on the coast of Syria is a refueling stop. Some people will call these a lily pad. So a plane can progress further and further after it refuels, or if it has any kind of problem. As we know, airplanes have a lot of problems. You like to have friendly airfields. You don't want to be forced down in unfriendly territory where you could be arrested, right? Where they could surround the airplane and block you from taking off. So if you're flying troops, Wagner troops, mercenaries, Russian troops from, say, the Crimea to Niger, you like having these stops. And then the next stop after that is in Libya. Russia's been building airfields and expanding airfields in Libya. So this gives them the ability to lily pad all the way into West Africa and Central Africa in order to outflank us, provide, along with China, more aid to the local governments, to the point where they want us out and Russia in. So if you picture this in like global overall strategic terms, these Russian bases in Syria are critical to Russia. So Russia being pushed out of these leaves like a giant void. It cuts off their power projection to Africa substantially. It cripples their naval, their Russian Navy presence in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, because it's such a long way from Murmansk, to Crimea. I mean, picture that. And their ports in the Baltic, they're at the mercy of NATO. Their fleets in the Black Sea, they're at the mercy of Turkey. So having an open Mediterranean base was just unbelievably super important. And they are on the verge of losing them. Now, the other reason that this is important, this is another macro global aspect of this. And I urge you to go to my Twitter and look at some maps, when this is uploaded. But for 20 years, a dream of the West, that would be United States, the Five Eyes countries, NATO, has been to supply Europe with Persian Gulf natural gas. Say, well, Matt, don't they get natural gas from the Persian Gulf? Yeah, but it has to go on an LNG tanker. LNG gas is like 10 times more expensive than pipeline gas. That's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. When you have to build a a gasification plant in Louisiana or Texas for billions of dollars, takes a decade to build, that in the port facilities for the LNG tankers. Then you ship the tanker across the ocean. It's like losing a percentage of gas. You can't help it. Every day, the gas is leaking out all the time. So it's not like a petroleum ship where you can just park it, send it somewhere else. The petroleum is still the same amount. An LNG tanker departs, it's got to go somewhere fast. There are only a few, there aren't an unlimited number of LNG ports in Europe. There's very few, like, Portugal, Germany, just a couple. Then you've got to have at the other end a regasification plant that then puts it into the European pipeline system. This gas by ship is 10 times more expensive. That's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Germany was getting cheap Russian gas. As we've discussed before, now Germany said, to hell with Europe. They're building the gas pipelines directly across Mongolia and otherwise to China because it's just cheaper. It's much cheaper. So the goal for the West has been to build a pipeline from Qatar, taking Qatari and Saudi gas by pipeline, not LNG, by pipeline straight up across Syria, then into Turkey, and then from Turkey to Europe. So that would be like the American Nord Stream pipeline to send gas to Europe. Countries love having these gas pipelines across their territory. Like Ukraine, for example, some of the gas came from Ukraine, but most of it was from Russia going through Ukraine. What does a country benefit from having a pipeline across their country? Number one, in all the treaties that have to do with the pipelines, they're closer than the final end market in Europe, right? So if you're, say, Syria, and you've got a crappy economy, a crippled economy, you're going to get the bargain price natural gas, and you get it first before it ever gets to Turkey. And you have valves, you have pumping stations and valves. So everybody involved with a pipeline project has to keep the happiness of the countries along the way so that they don't get so pissed off at the people that run the pipeline that they close the pipeline, which is why we've seen in Ukraine a lot of, the whole Burisma thing. Who controls the pipelines? Who controls the gas? I mean, we went an act of war to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline just to stop them from getting cheap Russian gas. Control of the pipelines across Ukraine is a big part of what that war is about. If Syria comes under joint Israeli, Turkish, American control, which is what we're going to look at, which is how it's going to shape up if our side, quote unquote, wins. They build this pipeline, they're not long. They don't take long to build. It's not like undersea. The part across the Black Sea, that'll take some time. But the money that's involved, we're talking. This is the lifeblood of the entire world. Forget about politics, religion. Energy is like the oxygen that everybody breathes. It's the currency of the world is energy. Before you talk about gold, dollars, Bitcoin, it's who controls the energy, controls the world. So a pipeline from Qatar to Europe has to cross Syria. There has to be a unified government in Syria eventually. The Turks would like to see the eastern part of Syria, the Kurdish part under control, a strong central government control. The Turks are already, virtually in Aleppo, the northern industrial city of Syria. They're never going to leave. In the south, the Israeli Air Force has already turned back Iranian transport planes that Israel said were heading towards Lebanon to resupply Hezbollah, but they could have just as easily been going to Damascus to send military supplies, who knows, because the Israeli Air Force went out and stopped these Iranian transport planes. So along with this pipeline that would cross Syria going north to south, basically, you have to also picture a resupply transport line going from Iran to Syria and Lebanon, both by road and by air. Syria under control of forces hostile to Iran and to Hezbollah, they won't be able to drive trucks across with arms, and they won't be able to fly missiles and other and drones across, because that airspace will be completely controlled by forces hostile to Hezbollah and Iran. So Russia and Iran, they want to preserve a link, which means they have to control Syria, or at least part of Syria, the southern part of Syria, Damascus, so that they can continue trucking material and flying material across. All that's going to be lost. So the Iran to the Mediterranean link will be cut, both air and ground, and the Russians will lose their bases, their force projection bases on the Med, and Syria will be set up to take this gas pipeline, which will be like the Middle East Nord Stream pipeline. So Europe will be on gas that America, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey all benefit from. So this is a huge global game. This is not just like who's winning in Congo, right? This is not like who's winning in Angola. We don't care about that. This is like a crossroads of the entire world here in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is where the energy war is being fought, and this is where the BRICS nations versus the West, NATO, Five Eyes, that conflict is being fought. And the reason I wanted to do a quick podcast today is because things are happening so fast. Even yesterday, I was just watching Pepe Escobar on another podcast. He was 24 hours ago, he's talking about Damascus falling in a matter of weeks. Damascus could fall by tomorrow. Because like I said, it's not where is the leading edge of the HTS, convoy. It's what's happening in terms of a popular uprising. Assad, there's rumors that he's already flown out of the country on a private jet. I mean, this could be, rebels in Damascus in the palace tomorrow. And then what's going to happen with these Russian bases on the Mediterranean? There's a unique geographical feature is that there's a coastal mountain range about 20 miles inland from the Mediterranean. So while it's possible to drive from Turkey to Aleppo to Hama to Homs to Damascus, it's just flat ground highway. You've got mountains like the Appalachians, 4,000 or 5,000 foot mountains, creating a physical barrier between the coastal, the Russian coastal bases in Latakia province and Tartus province, and the part that will be already controlled by the HTS. So will Russia just say, screw it, we're keeping our bases? Like Hong Kong or British Singapore, we're just going to keep it. Gibraltar, Britain, Gibraltar's in Spain. Britain said, we're not leaving, right? Till today, the British Navy has a base in Gibraltar. They just said, we're not leaving. So is Russia going to say, we're keeping Latakia and Tartus? Screw you. Ironically, right now in Doha, Qatar, they're having diplomatic meetings about this whole issue. And Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister that Tucker Carlson just had an interview with, highly recommended to watch that. He's down in Qatar, and he's saying we're not giving up on Syria, but I don't know what their options are. Russia doesn't have the capability right now of just sending, tens of thousands of troops there. If the Syrian army isn't going to fight, if the Syrian army is basically melting away, what can you do with gunships and fighter jets if there's no army to support? You're not going to succeed just with an air campaign if you have nobody on the ground to defend the ground. So it's questionable if Russia has any significant options at this point. There are even some rumors they've already left the Tartus naval base. The ships have left the Tartus naval base that they've had for half a century. So and I know they're still flying out of the Air Force Base near Latakia. And what's so dangerous about this is in the last few days, there have been American A-10 close air support jets, the A-10 Warthogs, have been flying out of a little piece of Syria that we're still occupying, which is right where Jordan, Iraq, and Syria meet, that like triple border. That's a U.S. base there, controlling the roads through there, and airfields and Predator drone fields, etc. So we definitely have very good ISR, eyes in the sky. You have A-10s flying. You have Russian jets flying missions. You have Israeli jets flying missions, blocking Iranian transport planes. There's rumors of Turkish helicopters flying, doing a resupply, battlefield resupply, with for sure U.S., Russian, and Israeli jets in the same airspace on their own missions, and possibly Turkish helicopters. There's a very strong chance that you could have somebody's cockpit warning go off, making them think that they are being painted by a hostile radar, and I've got to fire my missile before I'm shot down by the other guy's missile. This actually happened like 5 years ago. The airspace is so tight there that Latakia, the airfield at Latakia, it's actually called like Kamim Air Force Base. It's hard to say. I just call it the Air Force Base near Latakia. A Russian fighter bomber flying in was shot down by a Turkish F-16, American-built Turkish F-16, because there's literally disputed airspace over who owns a strip of airspace just north of Latakia between Turkey and Syria. So a Russian plane coming in off the Med to land was shot down and the pilot killed. And Turkey basically, set up an ambush, said, look, if one of these planes wanders into our disputed, what we consider our airspace, we're going to shoot it down. They did. So you can see this has already happened in this area. That was NATO Turkey shooting down a Russian plane. So right now we've got A-10s, Sukhois, Israeli F-16s, all over the same airspace. And they've all got cockpit warnings that will detect when they're being painted by hostile radar. And pilots know that they've got, a reaction time where they've got to make a decision if they're being painted to fire first. They've all got in their head, what are the other platforms? What are their ranges? What are their capabilities? And nobody wants to be shot down because you waited too long. So if we have an incident where Russians and Americans are firing missiles at each other in the air on purpose or by accident, as part of an ambush, like with the Turks shooting down the Russian 5 years ago, whether it's on purpose or not, you have Americans and Russians directly firing at each other over Syria. That'll be spun on the mainstream news as the beginning of a kinetic war between Russia and the United States. We've seen over the last month with the introduction of the ATACMS and the Storm Shadows given to Ukraine to be fired by American and British crews into Russia. There's a lot of people think that the neocons are trying to initiate an unstoppable war with Russia, that even when Trump is inaugurated, he can't put out the fire, that the war will go on no matter what Trump wants. And this might be an extension of that, where you have a potential pile of, kindling, just looking for a spark, with American, Israeli, and Iranian and Syrian. All these people have jets, helicopters, transport planes in the same airspace, and they're all doing different missions. One airplane is supporting troops here, another airplane is trying to send resupply there, and the chances of a mistake and a shoot down are extremely high. Extremely high.
Pepe Escobar just tweeted on X, the barbarians are literally at the gate. We are watching the total collapse of a nation in real lightning fast time. That was about 15 minutes ago. And then he
Right.
and then he wrote how this is it, deconstructing Lavrov. Turkey, Iran, and Russia may be hammering out a deal to normalize, legalize selected Salafi jihadis, thus sidelining the hyper fanatics from any position of power. The Sultan wins his bet for now.
Well, things are happening too fast because I just saw the Pepe Escobar, I forget the podcast, having a mental block. Anyway, a geopolitical podcast with Pepe Escobar. 24 hours ago, he was saying, if next month Damascus falls. 24 hours later, Damascus is falling, not weeks and months, hours and days. So things are happening lightning fast over there. So there's no chance for Iran to be forming up, brigades to send into this battle. The battle's going to be over before Russia or Iran can reinforce their side. And my question is, I would assume by now Assad, he's already in Iran, his family. But will the Russians abandon their bases, or will they just keep their bases like Britain kept Gibraltar?
Do you think with these insurgents, would they attack the Russian bases?
It's difficult because of that coastal mountain range. See, they're east of the mountains, it's just flat plains and straight line flat highways. And you can, if there's an obstacle, you can just go around it. If they defend some town or checkpoint, the enemy forces can just flow around it. You can't cross Appalachian-style mountains that easily because there's only 2 or 3 roads through the mountains that are easily blocked. So Russian air power can easily hold off anybody trying to come through this handful of mountain passes. And they don't want to give up their naval base or their air force base. That's not just about Syria. It's about Russian force projection through the Mediterranean and Africa.
Why are they doing this now, Matt?
Well, the timing of it is, people have said, well, this was probably meant to be kicked off next March. I think Pepe Escobar mentioned that in his podcast. But the collapse of Israel's offensive in Lebanon, I think that they decided to move the gambit up to right now. Before Trump gets into office, they can finalize all this before Trump has a chance to do anything about it. It's funny. Trump has not been getting the intelligence briefings by his own decision, the same way he said we're not doing FBI background checks because he doesn't trust them. When he was getting the intelligence briefings that he's entitled to in 2016, he found out that they were backstabbing him. They were giving him these briefings and then leaking that, Trump told this to Russia. Trump has been in contact with our enemies, giving the information from the daily briefing. So Trump has been saying, screw you. I have my own intelligence briefings by my own outside experts. But he made a big post today on Truth Social and also on Twitter, with like a couple sentences in all caps, America, stay out of this war in Syria. And it sounds very naive to me or silly because we're neck deep in this war. It's our CIA and State Department that's been, funneling the cash through Turkey to these groups. And Pepe Escobar, he thinks as well, and I would agree, Qatar, who stands to benefit the most from a pipeline, an eventual pipeline, they paid for these weapons. So a lot of the ground transport that we're seeing in Syria being driven by the HTS is American. It's American vehicles, and the fighters are mostly not even Syrians. They're mercenaries from the stands, from Turkey. They're well paid. These guys are the leading edge of these HTS fighters are not mostly not Syrians. They're not. Many of them aren't even Arabic speakers. They're Turkic language speakers. So Turkey is going to make a play. They'll probably de facto control the northern provinces of Syria. This is the real deal that'll be hammered out. There won't be a Turkish flag over Aleppo, but Turkey will control it. And I don't know if Jelani is going to be the ultimate leader and emerge as like the Fidel Castro of and rule Syria for the next 50 years. That could happen, or he could be just a front man for some other group. But they definitely want two things. They want to cut the air and ground transport line between Syria, the Mediterranean coast, and the Russian ports, and Iran. They want to cut that, and they want to put a natural gas pipeline across Syria north-south, running across Turkey into Europe. That would be the Qatar Nord Stream pipeline. So there are huge global ramifications for this. Losing Syria means that Russia's downstream bases in Libya and in Central North and Central Africa are going to be very difficult to maintain. So this has to be seen in like almost like World War II terms, like who cares about Sicily, or who cares about well, it's a stepping stone to the next front. But Syria is like the Japanese taking over the Philippines. After and today's December 7th. By the way, I graduated from Bud's training in 1979 on December 7th. But on December 8th, the Japanese took over the Philippines. And in the days following, they took over Singapore. These were our forward bases, and they were taken over, and that led to consequences that took years to unwind in Second World War. So looking at it in that context, the fall of Syria is like Britain losing Singapore or America losing the Philippines. When the Russians are looking at their big map, taking Syria off the board as a Russian base leaves a gigantic void. That even though planes can fly all the way from Russia to Libya at far range, it makes a problem. If anybody has an engine problem, you would like to have a safe landing spot in the middle where you can get repaired and refueled, change pilots, change crews. So yeah, this has got huge significance both for Russian force projection and for this gas from the Persian Gulf to Europe. And anybody that's just still saying who gives a crap about Syria, well, you may not care about Syria, but this is definitely one of the unfolding chapters of World War III. We're in it.
So if let's say Syria falls, it seems like it's pretty imminent that it's going to occur. Assad's already gone, if the rumors are true. What does this mean? 'Cause I was reading someone's Telegram, Eva Bartlett, I think it was Eva, that posted how with Syria out of the picture, or a new regime in there, that means that Palestine, the Palestinians have no protection, Hezbollah has no protection, and virtually...
Well, they can't be resupplied.
So what does that mean then for those two groups plus
Remember,
Iran?
That little strip, that 50-mile strip of the Mediterranean that belongs to Syria. Syria connects to Lebanon, right? So a ship full of things comes in from Russia or from China or from wherever into Latakia or Tartus. Then things get put in covered trucks and driven into Lebanon. It might say, food charity aid on the outside of the truck. It could be missiles. You don't know. So Hezbollah is resupplied two ways, from Iran by air and by truck. It's more difficult. That's why America still has that base right there at the Jordan, Iraq, Syria border to try to interdict that. But it also is an air corridor. There's an Iran to Syria air corridor. And the same thing happens. Stuff gets taken off the transport plane, put on it in a truck, and it winds up in Hezbollah control. So with Syria out of any friendly Russian or Iranian control. Now Hezbollah in Lebanon and Gaza, and the Palestinians in Gaza are completely cut off from resupply. So this is like a huge victory for Israel. And Israel's talking, there are Israelis talking about like a buffer zone in southern Syria. So while this is all falling and the surrounding countries are going to have to make an agreement, with a new emerging government in Syria, Turkey's part of the agreement is probably going to be, we're going to have a very strong presence in the north, and we're going to have a strong hand to deal with the Kurds. And Israel's going to say, Golan Heights forever, plus even more, a southern buffer zone. The roads that go from Iran to Syria go right across the top of Lebanon, okay, right across. Because remember, it's a coastal mountain range from Syria into Lebanon. So that road that's not inside of Lebanon goes right across the bottom of Syria. With all of that now under Israeli control, there's no more resupply to Hezbollah or to Gaza. Not of anything, shoes, bullets, nothing. And there will be no friendly ships coming into Syria, also unloading shoes or bullets. So yeah, that's a huge victory for Israel, huge victory for Turkey, huge victory for the Qatar and the people that want to put the gas pipeline to Europe. Huge defeat for Russia, huge defeat for Iran. But look, this is a world war, and we had Pearl Harbor, we had fall of Singapore, fall of the Philippines, and that didn't mean the war was over and we lost. There's going to be innings in this game where one side hits a grand slam home run. That doesn't mean the game's over. 2 or 3 innings go by very quiet, then another team gets some runs. The war could be going on for a long time. This might be a new kind of war where it never goes kinetic, because everybody realizes if this escalates nuclear, it's game over. The only good option is don't play the nuclear game. So could we though see things like ships being destroyed at sea? I think that's one of the more likely things. We saw the cables in the Baltic from I think Lithuania to Finland, or trying to picture where they were, but allegedly a Chinese ship accidentally dragged its anchors across a couple of these big fiber optic lines and cut them. These things are not something you can patch overnight, and it's the information, not much of the information is carried in the satellites. Images are carried in the satellites, but the big connectivity is under the oceans on these big fiber optic cables. And they're just laying there in the mud. They're not like dug in a trench or encased. They just spool them off of a ship and it just lays there. And they're marked on the maps, the charts, so that everybody's chart says, be careful, don't anchor here. There's an important fiber optic cable, that NATO is using, that everybody is using. So all of that bandwidth that's going through a fiber optic cable, and anchor drags it and cuts it. Well, that just happened 2 weeks ago. And the Chinese ship quickly left, or I think the Denmark or somebody tried to seize the ship, and I don't know what ended up with, but we'll start seeing that. Fiber optic lines will be cut. There may be accidents at sea. An LNG tanker, if Russia wanted to make a revenge on Nord Stream, if this turns into an energy war, an LNG tanker explodes in near Houston, it would be a nuclear bomb next to Houston, right? If a LNG tanker explodes in the middle of the North Atlantic, nobody will even know it. The satellites will pick it up, maybe seismic detectors will pick it up, but it won't affect anybody except the people on the ship and their families. So if an LNG tanker just goes boom in the middle of the Atlantic, how are you going to prove it was a Russian torpedo if Russia doesn't claim it? So we could see a slow ratcheting up of the kinetic side, but in deniable ways, like cutting undersea cables and maybe taking out a few ships. Because remember, when we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline to keep Europe, Germany's just the manifold of the pipeline for all of Europe. When we blew up the Nord Stream, our part of the deal was, oh, don't worry, you can buy all the LNG you want from Texas and Louisiana for 10 times the price, right? That isn't lost on Russia. And they know that if oh, wow, there was an accidental sabotage of an LNG gasification or liquefaction plant. Somebody started a bad fire in an LNG liquefaction plant and the thing just all exploded. Shit, it'll take 10 years to fix that sucker. Pipelines are different. When you lay a terrestrial pipeline, it's very fast to just lay pipe across the desert, very fast. And every 10 kilometers, you can lay an extra couple hundred meters of pipe as a spare in case somebody tries to blow up a little bit of it. You can fix it, days, as opposed to the Nord Stream underneath the Baltic Sea, right? So it behooves whoever controls the gas to have it moving across the land. And this is another reason why we're fighting in Ukraine over the Baltic. All of these energy pipelines, number one, there is natural gas, not the Baltic, the Black Sea. There is natural gas all under the Black Sea. Turkey's got a slice of it. Georgia, where we're trying to pull a color revolution on the east side of the Baltic, they've claimed some of it. So everybody's fighting over the natural gas under the Black Sea, but also over the pipelines that will go under this is like a crossroads of energy. It's like, the revenge of the old biblical times almost, that Levant, it's still super critical real estate. And Syria is almost like the capstone block of the arch. Controlling Syria, it cuts Iran off from the Med completely, and they can't support Hezbollah or Gaza anymore, or the West Bank. It cuts off Russia from their seaports. Their Navy is crippled, their Air Force is crippled, and they can't support Hezbollah or Gaza. And this is a super critical area right here.
What should Trump be doing right now? Should he be more vocal?
I think that tweet just made him sound like he's out of the loop, because he said U.S. should not get involved in Syria. U.S. is involved up to here in Syria. Those are American vehicles. The pay is jointly being paid by Qatar and the United States through cutouts. Those mercenaries are not fighting for, out of love of, Syria. They're not even Syrians. It's a mercenary army, and they're being paid. We're paying their salaries. We're buying their bullets, and it's nothing. And we don't know. Look, maybe Jelani, he's seen the light, and he's a true moderate. I tend to think he's had public relations training that, hey, it's really bad when you line up people in orange jumpsuits and behead them all. That makes people really want to fight you. So when you take over Syria, don't do that. Tell everybody, oh, we're going to, love the Christians and love the Alawites. We're not going to fight our Shia brothers. Then when you get control of the whole country, you can go back to beheading people and, murdering Christians. And there's another little historical irony. A little more than a century ago, the Armenian genocide happened in Turkey, and a lot of the surviving Christians, Armenians living in Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, they were marched into Syria, or they escaped into Syria. So a lot of these are the descendants of the survivors of the last Turkish genocide of Christians in Turkey. Their families resettled in Syria have been living peacefully in secular Syria. Assad is I think Alawite. The Alawites are kind of like the Druze in Lebanon. They're not recognized as legit by Shia or Sunni Muslims. They're like a Muslim offshoot from the Middle Ages. Syria has got a secular culture and a secular army. That's why it's easy to tell the Syrian soldiers they got a short haircut, no beard, no mustache. That means secular. Okay, the people that are approaching have got the beards and the wild hair and some ISIS patches, the old black and white circle patch. So you can't hide the fact that you're a Syrian soldier. You got the short haircut. It's like you're You can't just instantly grow out your beard and hair. You're captured, you're done. So, but that was also a signal to the population that they're not religious soldiers. They're secular. There's Christian, there's Christians, there's Alawites, there's Sunni, there's Shia. Well, when Jelani takes over, we'll see what happens. But I think it's just a PR thing for him to act like the moderate, tolerant jihadist.
What do you think then? You think Trump? Do you still think Trump will be inaugurated?
Yeah, I think so.
But what kind of problem is he going to be facing with this potentially?
Well, just like 2 weeks ago, we were talking about what happens when they start firing ATACMS, and the Russians fired one of those Oreshnik Hazel missiles at the plant in Ukraine. And I saw another Ted Postal video. Apparently, he overestimated its power. He did a new video on that, and this Oreshnik does not appear to be as powerful as it was first seen. It may not be the game changer that it was promoted as, but Russia. This is like a classic example of like trying to. You can't like wipe out mosquitoes with a sledgehammer, right? There's a tool for every job, and the Russian long-range missile tools are not suited for doing anything in Syria. If you're going to fire a missile at a bunch of jeeps with a couple hundred guys in them, they got plenty more where that came from. It's not like taking out a missile factory, a 1 kilometer square missile factory complex. There's no targets like that in Syria. If there's any targets like that in Syria, they would be more like the Russian bases. So they've got to be more worried about that. But I think that Russia could conceivably hold the Syrian coast. There could be, for example, a situation where Assad goes to Latakia and declares it the new capital of occupied Syria. Like the free Syrians are on the coast with the Russians, and it's the jihadis on the other side of the mountains. We don't know how this is all going to play out. I don't think that it's going to be easy to build a pipeline across that, but there's billions of dollars being invested in making that bet.
What will Iran do in all this?
What can they do?
They just take it?
It's happening too fast. And that's another big aspect of this is the tremendous intelligence failure this represents by the Iranians and the Russians. Normally, you think that the Iranian secret services and the Russian foreign intelligence services are like first class, and there's no way that this could have all been organized in northern Syria and in Turkey under their noses and pulled off like a surprise attack. But apparently it did happen. And everybody's, smart people like Pepe Escobar, yesterday he's saying if Damascus falls next month, I mean, this is Saturday. On Friday, Pepe Escobar himself is saying, if Damascus falls next month, is there time for Iran to send, armies from Iran to block the city of Homs? Okay, it's Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and then a big gap, and then Damascus. But it's all high-speed highway. He was saying, does Iran have time to send forces to defend Homs? Homs fell in that 24 hours. Now they're knocking on the door of Damascus, and there's an uprising inside of Damascus. So this is happening I hesitate to say, warp speed. And Trump is saying America should stay out of it. It's like, hello, your CIA is doing it. Forget about staying out of it. This is not an organic uprising of Syrian people. There was a mercenary army, organized, trained, equipped. One of the things that's happening that's in leading to the speed of this conquest is that Ukrainians have sent FPV drone operators and technicians and trained the mercenaries in their use. So these Syrian soldiers have absolutely no understanding or defense against FPV drones just flying into their positions. 4 or 5 years ago, Turkey had a war with Armenia is it over no, excuse me, Azerbaijan, Armenia. It's the Nagorno-Karabakh war. But our side was completely blindsided by Turkish drones supplied to Azerbaijan, which is trying to like wipe out this Armenian enclave. When one side has full drone knowledge, weapons, ISR, visibility from the sky, weaponized drones, surveillance drones, and the other doesn't, you're just sitting there in a tank at a crossroads. You're dead meat. You're just dead meat. You're not even in the fight, right? You're just sitting there waiting to be blown up from the sky. That's what is happening to the Syrian army in Syria right now. So you can see how many elements of a world war are involved here. Ukrainian trainers, technicians, mercenaries are in this fight in Syria, bringing their knowledge of drone warfare and the drones with them, as part of this conquest. So any military right now that is not fully up to speed on drones is like a cavalry army getting ready to fight machine guns in 1914, from horseback. It doesn't matter if you've got tanks. If you don't control the airspace from drones, your tank is dead. And so the Syrian army, and this is another aspect of this war, because this is, I don't even know what generation you put on this war, but sanctions are part of this world war. One of the reasons for all the hate and discontent against Assad is Western sanctions on Syria have been extremely choking. It has just destroyed their economy. Their only source of revenue would be from oil in the east. We control that and send that oil to Turkey, the far eastern corner of Iraq. That's where the oil is. But that oil doesn't benefit the Damascus regime. It's going into Turkey. And it's funding these rebel groups, these terrorist groups that we are also supporting. So the people in Syria are starving. They can't buy a freaking aspirin, right? They're making no money. It's a total depression. So at that point, almost anything will look like an improvement. The soldiers aren't paid. So if soldiers aren't paid, you know what they do? They set up checkpoints. They do shakedowns. If the only authority that comes from your uniform and your patch is that you've got a gun and a couple of vehicles, then you set up ad hoc tax collection points and you just shake down citizens because you're not being paid, right? But you have a gun and a uniform, so you set up checkpoints and you shake down Syrian citizens. Well, this makes the Syrian citizens basically hate the Syrian army. Assad didn't plan that. He doesn't want that. He'd love to have a great economy and pay his soldiers. But the sanctions have to be seen as part of this whole war effort. So the sanctions have choked off the Syrian economy. So even Jelani coming in, hey, I'm a moderate now. I'm not ISIS anymore. I'm a moderate. They're like, anything has to be better than the status quo. That's where you see like women with no scarf on cheering. They may be forced into burqas next year. They may be sex slaves next year. We don't know. But they have had a great PR campaign and training from the West to convince Jelani, don't do it like Baghdadi. No videos of beheadings. None of that. We're not going to scare everybody into submission with beheading videos. We're going to come in preaching tolerance, unification, all Syrians together. Then once you get control, do whatever you want. But we'll see how it plays out.
Where can people find you, Matt?
My website is Enemies Foreign and Domestic. And if you want to get all of my many books, you can get them from me on my website, enemiesforeignanddomestic.com, PayPal, post office box, all of that. But you can also get the Kindle and the Audible versions from Amazon. But if you get them from me, I'll sign them, and more of it comes to me. And you've been having some fantastic guests on here lately, I've noticed, and I think that you've become like a really top level podcaster lately. So I know you've switched to doing this full time, right? I mean, this is like lining up guests is it.
This is it, man. Trying to just keep moving the way the events unfold, and I'm just super appreciative that people like you are always coming on. I mean, others as well, but you're definitely part of my regular people that give me updates on where
You've
we're at
gone
in the
over
world.
1,000 shows, haven't you?
Yeah, this is 1,004.
Wow, it's amazing, isn't it? And I like it. I like on Rumble. I know you're also spreading out into YouTube, but I like on Rumble when you, at least the way that the way my settings are set up, when I click on coffee and a mic, it shows like a whole page of like thumbnails of like the last 20 or 30 shows. It's very impressive batting order. I mean, it's like, you know, people like Martin Armstrong, you get like a ton of views on some of these really well-known people. That's for sure. And I know YouTube is also going to be big, but YouTube is always looking for reasons to give you strikes or cut out your videos,
Yeah, we'll see how
block your
long we'll see
videos.
how long that channel lasts for.
Yeah,
But I feel like I have nothing to lose. I mean, that's what Matt Smith and I were talking about. Is at this point, I wasn't posting on there anyway, so we'll see how long it stays
right.
up.
Yeah, and some people like Viva Fry, when he's on with Robert Barnes, they'll like do like the first 20 minutes on YouTube and then just say, for the rest of the show, go over to Rumble. But you're not really like monetized on either show, right? I mean, you're not making like direct income off of these,
No, Rumble I do.
but it's not much probably. I'm hearing Rumble's pretty stingy.
No, so, I mean it's not tons of money or anything. But
Yeah.
YouTube I never planned on monetizing because I think they'll just take it down at some point whenever they want.
Yeah. And there's also like Odyssey, and you might
BitChute,
consider that.
BitChute.
Yeah, BitChute's like old legacy. I don't know. I used to go there a lot, but outside of monetization from the actual streaming platforms, how can people just support you more directly?
Oh, thanks for that, Matt. I have a Venmo, and so people go on there. PayPal, Zelle, Cash App, and then I have Patreon, Locals, and a PO box.
How do they find them? I mean,
It's all on
just
every single episode. So there's underneath the support my work under both the audio file and the video file, and the videos. There's links for all that,
so
and
you can
also
just go
PO
like
box.
straight to Venmo and just boom.
Yep.
Is it? You're in Arizona? I thought it was always like 115 degrees there. You must be. Are you like in a sweat box, the sweat lodge?
No, it's 70 degrees here today. 75
Really?
degrees here today.
So that's how we dress in Florida when it hits like 60.
It's supposed to be
We're
in
like,
the 60s
we're like
next week.
freezing at 60 in Florida.
It's supposed to be in the 60s next week here, and then I have to open the windows during the day so I don't use the heat. When it hits 50 for the high, that's when I put the heat on.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Usually, I think you have to go up like the Flagstaff or up in the mountains to get cool like that in Arizona.
I think it's snow. A lot of snow up in Flag.
Oh yeah, not down in the Devil's Frying Pan there in Phoenix Valley.
Matt, as always, thanks for coming back on. And
Thank you.
for people that are listening, Matt will be back on Tuesday with
Oh,
Matt Smith.
That's right, and I'm going to post like some maps and article links and things like that as one thread on Twitter. So if anybody watches this, just go to my Twitter and click through some of these pictures. It'll make more sense.
And make sure you follow Matt on both on Substack, Gab, and X.
Thank you.
Mic drop.